So we're going to start. And it looks like we are live. So why don't we start off in a second? Just give me another minute here. I just want to make sure this live stream's done preparing. All right, looks like we're good to go. So why don't we start off with, I'm going to do a roll call, similar to what we did last time. I'm just going to go down the list that I have, and then after that, we can do the swearing in, and I'll turn it over to the chairman. So I'm going to ask, call out some names, and then you can just say present or here, however you want to do it. So first, Robert Bob.
Present.
Christy Lopez.
Here.
Elena Bell. I don't know if she's here. Doesn't look like it. Robert Bennett. Sorry, you were muted.
I'm muted?
You're not now.
Okay, and I was on last week for the whole time, but was muted.
Yeah, I marked you as present once I saw your name, so you're there.
Thank you.
Kent Bass.
Here.
Samantha Davis.
Present.
Tina Front.
Here.
Pastor Golston. I don't know if he's here. Can always come back. Herb Gray, I think, may not be able to make it. I don't see him here.
I believe Pastor.
Oh, did Pastor Golston just come on? Oh, yep.
Hi, everybody.
Emily Gunston.
Present.
Ronald Hampton.
Here.
LaShunda Hill.
Here.
Corey Knight.
Here.
George Lambert. All right, Jeffrey Richardson.
Present.
Naike Savain.
Present.
Sultan Shakir.
Present.
Mignon Smith.
Present.
Patrice Sultan.
Here.
And Kurt Vordren.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum. So I am going to, as I mentioned, we need to swear commissioners in. We were supposed to do this the first time we met, but forgot. So I'm going to turn it over to the chairman, who's going to lead folks in swearing in for oath of office. I sent forms out via email. And if you could get those back to me as soon as possible, that would be great. Chairman, you're muted.
Yes, it probably helps if I'm unmuted. Blaine, I believe there are 3 members who are not present, Elena Bell, Herb Gray, and George Lambert.
Correct.
So they will need to be sworn in later. And what everybody will need to do is, besides taking the oath of office orally today, you need to sign the form that Blaine sent to you and send it back. That's necessary in order for you to be duly sworn, and you need to be duly sworn in order to duly participate. I kind of hate doing it this way because I sort of feel like it's a little impersonal, but I'm going to swear everybody in at the same time, if that's okay. And what I'm going to ask in a minute is that you would raise your right hand and repeat after me. And when I do that, I will begin, I will say I, and then I will pause, and you're supposed to state your name. You can swear or affirm. I will say solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute. So you pick whichever. Those are really kind of the key pointers as we go through this. So again, I apologize that we're doing this everybody at once, but the alternative would be doing all of us sitting through doing 20 of these individually. So if you would raise your right hand and repeat after me, and you probably should unmute yourselves. Samantha, you're still muted. And if we start to get feedback, then after you've said your name, then mute yourself. All right, so if you would raise your right hand and repeat after me. I
I, Jeffrey Richards, full-time security.
do solemnly swear or affirm
Do solemnly swear
Affirm
that I will faithfully execute the laws
that I
that I will faithfully execute the laws
of the United States of America
of the
United
United
States
States
Of America.
and of the District of Columbia,
and of the
and
District
of
of
the
District of
Columbia.
Columbia,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve,
protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States,
The Constitution of the United States.
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of the Police Reform Commission,
of the
of the
police
Police
Reform
Reform
Commission.
which I'm about to enter.
which I am about to enter.
Congratulations, everybody's sworn in. Except you still need to sign the form, and Blaine needs to track down the 3 missing folks. So I think my duties are done. I'm going to mute myself, follow for a little bit, and then get off, if you'll excuse me. So thank you all. Thank you all again for your willingness to participate.
All right, and I'll turn it over to Christy and Bob to take us into sort of a follow-up and recap of the last meeting we had, which was the emergency meeting. And yeah.
Thank you very much, and good evening, members of the commission. Last week, we had an emergency meeting at the commission. It was a meeting in which we gathered a tremendous amount of information pursuant to the most recent, the young man who was killed by the police department. We also called for that emergency meeting based on a number of requests from members of the commission. So we want to make sure that the commission members' voices were heard, and that we were delighted, at least, to have the chief of police on short notice attend our meeting and engaged in a fairly robust conversation and discussion with members of the commission. We also were pleased to have the deputy mayor, the interim deputy mayor for public safety, attend the meeting. Most importantly were the number of the questions that were raised and the issues and concerns by members of the commission, and the follow-up that will be taking place pursuant to those questions. And so tonight's meeting is to move the commission into the body of its work, and commission members have received the information with respect to the committees that committee work, and we applaud members of the commission who volunteered to serve on very important committees. And Christy will walk us through the committee process. I might also add that I was going to do this later, but I'll do it at the beginning of the meeting. Much of the work of the commission and the committees, we will have to engage members of the deputy mayor's office as well as the city administrator's office, because much of our work as we go through the committees will require the resources and contacts within the district administration. And to that extent, from time to time in our meetings, we will invite members of the administration to hear the issues and concerns that are raised by individual members of the commission, not necessarily to engage in conversation with the commission, but to take back important information within the administration and then to connect administrative officials with members of the commission and through the committee process as we work through this very important work that we are about to undertake. And so at this point, if there are any questions from members of the commission, we can raise those questions now, or we can move into the next agenda item, which is the focus on our committee process. And then to give you an update with respect to a meeting that we had with the city auditor with respect to the investigation into the gay shooting and what the city auditor process will be with respect to that independent analysis and investigation, as it were, that we called for as members of our commission. Christy.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Commissioners, all for being here. It's really great to see all of you again. Yes, as Bob noted, one of the things that we did both before the emergency meeting we had last week and during the emergency meeting was ask for an independent investigation into the shooting by MPD of Deon Kay. It is our end, as we've informed all of the commissioners earlier this week. It appears that the DC auditor, Kathy Patterson, is going to add this shooting to the group of MPD shootings that she is currently investigating. And because of the recency of the time she's taking on this this investigation, she will be able to provide concurrent review and oversight of it. So I think this is, and I think one of the things that's important about this for us is that it does allow for that independent set of ears and eyes. She does have subpoena power and the ability to obtain information to make sure that the investigation is completed appropriately and completely. And importantly, it allows this commission to attend to its charge and the work that it needs to do while we will be providing information and asking the auditor to look at particular lines of inquiry and to ask for particular evidence. So I think that is really something that is a tribute to the thoughtfulness and the commitment to these issues that this commission has already shown, that it immediately was able to achieve this sort of impact. And I look forward to our much broader work that will really get at the root of a lot of what we've been talking about over the past week or so.
Christy, if I may jump in.
Of course.
One of the questions raised is and we did send a copy of Ms. Patterson's but correspondence relative to prior shootings. So one of the questions that was raised is the number of cases that she's currently reviewing in terms of prior police shootings. If you may cover that just briefly. But we did send copies of Ms. Patterson's correspondence to both the chief of police and I believe also to the chair of the Judiciary Committee.
Yes, Samantha, I see your question in the chat there, and that should be in the letter that from Kathy Patterson to the council, I believe, or was it the mayor? That was emailed to all the commissioners and is also publicly available. So we can obviously make sure that is available on our website as well, right, Blaine?
Correct. As soon as, yeah.
The ones that she's already sent?
Yes.
Okay. So that everyone will, that'll be one more place for everyone to make sure that they have access to that information. Okay, great. All right, so let's move on, if we can, to the commission committees. It was really great to see the enthusiasm people have for this. We, as if people will recall, we have tried to divide up the work of the commission into 5 committees. It's not a perfect division. There will, of course, be a need for committees to work together and not to be overly siloed, but we hope that this will allow us to focus our work. And there may be some things in the legislation that that don't squarely fit into one of these commissions, but we'll make sure that we find a home for them. And we'll talk about that. But so just so all the commissioners know this, but just so the public, and this will be on our website soon as well, but just so the public knows, the commissioners on the first committee, which is police in schools and policing youth, that committee will have Elena Bell, Samantha Davis, Herb Gray, Emily Gunston, Ron Hampton, Lashonda Hill, Naike Savain, Sultan Shakir, and Mignon Smith. It's our largest committee, and each committee will choose a lead and a co-lead to help coordinate things. So that will be particularly important on our larger committees like that one. Our second committee is called Assessing and Expanding Violence Reduction Efforts, including non-police responses. And we have a little subtitle, Especially Gun Violence and Domestic Violence, just to be sure that we don't miss those in all of this. On that committee are Robert Bennett, Samantha Davis, Emily Gunston, Ron Hampton, Lashonda Hill, Corey Knight, and Sultan Shakir. The third committee is Building Up Non-Police Community Health and Safety Interventions. For example, that would include mental health or behavioral crises, homelessness, drug addiction, family and neighbor disputes. And on that committee, we have Elena Bell, Kent Bass, Tina Front, Delonte Golston, Herb Gray, Emily Gunston, Jeffrey Richardson, and Patrice Sultan. The fourth committee is Reforms to Police MPD Practices, Force Stops, Searches, Recruitment, and Training. On that committee, we have Kent Bass, George Lampert, Jeffrey Richardson, Mignon Smith, Patrice Sultan, and Kurt Wardran. And the fifth and final committee is MPD Accountability and Oversight, both internal and external. And on that committee, we have Robert Bennett, Tina Front, Delonte Golston, Corin Knight, George Lambert, Naike Savain, and Kurt Wardran. And again, we have some information about what each of the committees will be doing. And that we'll again put that on our website as well. But each committee will, supported by the co-chairs and the staffing committee that we are currently trying to bring on, develop a schedule for meeting as a committee on a regular basis, create a timeline for completion of work, identify information to request and persons to meet with, to interview, including members of the public, city and MPD officials, and persons with expertise in areas relevant to committee topics. They will suggest topics and questions for a community survey. They will meet on a regular basis to review and discuss information and meet with persons with information relevant to the committee. They will determine whether to seek a commission-wide public hearing or hearings on a particular topic or topics. And they will organize and inform the content of those commission-wide hearings. They will work on committee issues outside of regular committees just to make sure that they're up to date on things, reading information about a topic, reviewing information provided by staff. They'll coordinate with the other committees to avoid unnecessary duplication of effort. They'll determine specific areas upon which the committee will issue recommendations. They'll draft tentative findings and recommendations and bring to the full commission for consideration and approval. And as part of those tentative findings and recommendations, the committees will recommend whether provisions of the emergency legislation relevant to their committee should be continued or revised, as well as recommend any additional changes to law or policy. And once agreed upon, they will work with the commission staff to incorporate findings and recommendations into the commission report. So as you can see, it's quite a long list of work to do. It's quite a lot of work to do, especially given that at the moment our deadline is December 31st. So we hope that everyone can get going right away on that, at least as to start figuring out what it is that each committee wants to focus on. And then hopefully we will very soon, hopefully the next 2 weeks, we will have our staff on board, and they will be able to help the commissions really, gather information, help them analyze information, summarize information, and really make enable us to achieve a lot in a short time. Are there any questions about any of that?
Again, there's a pretty heavy load lift, I might add, for the various committees, and Krista and I will be participating with the committees as well. But I would reemphasize what I stated earlier. Much of the work of the committees will have to have a relationship with members of the city administration through the deputy mayor for public safety and others. And I believe it doesn't take away from our independence as a commission, but those agencies have information that would be very important for the work of the various committees. And from time to time, as I stated, we will invite members of the Deputy Mayor's Office for Public Safety or the administration to participate with us at the commission level. And once the committees are organized, I think part of the organization of the committees is really to tease out what information each committee will need as it moves forward in terms of research or just general information, more information than we've already provided within our Dropbox with respect to a number of studies which has been done. And then, of course, as Christy indicated, we are in the final stages of interviewing. Well, we'll be moving to interview firms that have submitted proposals to serve as a staff to the commission in terms of its research, et cetera. And as we stated at our first meeting, the request for proposal and what the details of what we're looking for has been posted on our website as well. Any questions from members of the commission?
Quick question: Are we finished? This is Pastor Goldston. Are we finished with the recap from last week's emergency meeting? I did note that there were a couple of follow-up questions that I didn't see addressed in the emails. I just want to make sure that we. Oh.
Yes, I think one of Pastor Goldston. I think one of the correspondence that was sent out to the commission was a request that we consolidate all of the questions that were asked, and there may be other questions from members of the commission, and then those questions will be submitted, and then those questions will be forwarded on to the independent investigation within the police shootings. Christy, you might want to enlarge on that.
Did that answer your question, Pastor Delante?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing, getting feedback from the chief on the different body cam footage that we haven't seen yet. I'm definitely still interested in, I don't think I heard anybody lift up the question of contact that our young brother Deon K had with the YRS. That's another piece that I'm definitely interested in hearing more information about. So I just want to kind of put on the record that those are a couple things I'm definitely interested in seeing follow up on. And I will take a look at the email and make sure I add those questions to that.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll create a document in a central place that everyone can add to. And it would be great if one of the commissioners would volunteer to be the person to help collate all the information and check in with the commissioners to make sure that we don't miss any questions that anybody has. And then we will be meeting with the auditor to make sure that the auditor has all of our questions, lines of inquiry that we would like to see followed up upon, information that we think it might be important to request, and we can share that with the auditor. So we will definitely be doing that. And so if you do not, we'll create a central place so that we make sure nothing slips through the cracks on that. So thank you.
Yeah, because I believe there was supposed to be a little follow-up on the legal aspects of seeing the police who, yes, shot Dion, but also the other police that was present, their police record, their record itself. So I think we had to look up if there's a law, if that could be shared or not. The chief summed up from his memory what their record was, but we wanted the full record of the police that did the shooting and that was present.
Right. I definitely remember that was one of them.
Can I just ask for clarification? Does that mean that the commission is not going to have another opportunity to speak with Chief Newsham publicly like we did on the 4th to follow up on our lines of questioning? Obviously, the auditor is going to have an opportunity to investigate, but are we completely turning over all of our questions to the auditor, or are we going to have another opportunity to speak directly to the chief?
We'll definitely almost certainly have another opportunity to speak to the chief. We're not going to be speaking to the chief directly about this particular investigation until the investigation is done, or we have questions about why it's not done yet, or, along the lines when there's something to really have a conversation about beyond what we talked about at our emergency meeting. And that is, as we've talked about a bit, it is a tremendous amount of work to conduct an investigation like that. And we just want to make sure that that the interest of the commission in seeing a complete and fair investigation are met while the commission is able to continue its work. So that's our thinking on that. And we've shared and discussed. So I think that is the path forward on that, but that does not mean that the chief, or as Mr. Bob said, members of the mayor's office and other members of other parts of city government won't be talking with us about, other things, largely, I think, more sort of, rather than individual incidents, more about systemic things, as sometimes illustrated by individual incidents, but getting at some of the root causes, some of things, some of what we're talking about.
If I could just briefly, at the emergency hearing, I asked the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety's office and the Chief of Police to release the body cam footage and the radio runs of the other officers who were present. I also asked if they would be willing to release it to this body under an NDA or a protective order. And I believe Dr. Mitchell said that he would check with the General Counsel's office and give us an answer on that by today's date, the 14th. And I just want to confirm on the record, because I think some people were expecting us to have an answer about that at this meeting, but they have not responded at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear in the email I sent about a week ago, that what we're going to do is have everybody on the commission put all of our requests, including the ones that were made during the last meeting, put them all in one place, and then give those directly to the independent auditor, or the DC auditor, I'm sorry, so that the DC auditor can follow up on those lines of inquiry and make sure that information is obtained where it's appropriate. If there's any legal reason, the auditor can figure that out. That's the approach we're taking, because otherwise, we spend all of our time on this one very important incident, and we don't get at the root causes and underlying issues that we all want to get to try to prevent similar incidents in the future. So, that's I think, the approach that we've all talked about, I think, and that Bob and I have talked about a lot. So that's where we're going moving forward. And I hope that makes sense. I hope that is now clear if it wasn't before.
Can I add sorry. Can I add that I think it's confusing, though, to the public for us as a commission to call an emergency meeting as if we are, going to present a certain set of facts to the public, and then now to come back within like less than, a week, 2 weeks to say that, oh, and by the way, we're turning this over and we don't have really the time to discuss that. So I want to name that because, I'm thinking about it from thinking about like what is the purpose of the commission, and if the purpose of the commission is to be able to just dive into some of the deeper issues within the department, then perhaps, you know, maybe moving forward, we need to think about what it means when we present an emergency meeting to the public, because now it looks like we need to follow up on something that we're saying we don't have the time, or we're not making the time for it because it's now been turned over to the hands of someone else. And I know that probably feels like a breach of trust to the public. And I think that's something that we have to be aware of.
Okay, yeah, we perhaps we should be more clear in the future. I think we made a statement before the last commission meeting, and then said again during the commission that we were calling for an independent investigation. And the whole purpose of calling for that independent investigation was so that investigation would happen. I don't know that anyone felt, I didn't realize that anyone would think that it was the commission that was conducting that independent investigation. I thought the point of us calling for one was to make clear that we needed someone to do that and that it would not be us. And I think part of having the chief come talk to us was to get as much immediate information before the public as we could, knowing that you can't get as much information as perhaps you want or perhaps should be able to and under the current law, but trying to get as much information as we could to help underscore the need for that sort of review. So I think perhaps it's partly because we're a new commission and the public isn't really familiar with who we are or what we're doing. But that I think is the balance we're trying to strike, is trying to meet those interests and of having that independent inquiry while still being able to do our work moving forward. But yeah, I think your point's well taken, and we'll try to definitely be as clear as possible moving forward.
Is there anything in terms of anything that we can do in terms of expediting the process? I believe like the other cases that the auditor is looking at is still like DeQuan Young, Jeffrey Price, Marquise Austin, I think Eric Carter, right? And so many of these have already been several years. And so in thinking about what the commission can do, is there any way we can expedite the process, at least when it comes to like the body camera footage and the request that we made here, to put some pressure on the auditor and others to get that information publicly available as soon as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that we should look into what we as a commission have the authority to do now, and what we as a commission can recommend be done more systemically, so that investigations are completed more quickly.
In that same vein, Christy, I just want to point out that, you know, what the city did in this case was the very, very bare minimum required by the new law. They insisted on only releasing the footage from Officer Alvarez, which does not give a clear picture of what happened or how we can prevent it from happening again. And I hope that as a commission, as we undertake this work of making recommendations to the council about what the law should be and must be, that will take into consideration the fact that they did not release it publicly, although the public has been asking for that. They've elected to not be transparent in this case. And so, although I understand that the independent auditor is going to do their own investigation, I hope that we'll take seriously what that means about the recommendations that we make here.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, we've had very serious conversations and discussion with the city auditor. I think the auditor on her own started the investigation into prior police shootings, and I think that was an important investigation on the part of the other city auditor. It was before we were formed as a commission, or even if we were even being thought of as a commission. So I think putting all of the questions and all of the very legitimate concerns that we have into the hands of an investigative group or an investigative agency such as the city auditor, with the powers to subpoena records if they aren't readily available, whether it's the body cam or any of the questions that we raised. I think that's the appropriate place for this investigation to take place. But I also will like to ensure, Blaine and Christy, that all of the questions that were raised at the last week's meeting and concerns, that those questions are compiled, and that the compilation of those questions are shared with the commission as those questions are moved forward into the to the city auditor and into her process. And so and this is the reason why we shared the auditor's correspondence with the city administration, with the police chief and others with respect to the cases that she's currently reviewing. We also had a discussion with the investigator that the auditor, with the auditor, and they're going to do a very thorough investigation. They're independent, they know their business. And so please continue, keep bringing the very important questions up. I mean, there may be questions that are thought of after tonight's commission meeting, and we need to make sure that those questions are put forward. And also, we will have a discussion with respect to the timing that it would take to complete the investigation, because none of us wants to see, the investigations into any of these shootings go on for, for months and months at a time. So, Ms. Davis, the question you raised with respect to, let's get a timeline, and so let's come back with what a timeline would look like, and what would be the the details that would be required to conduct that investigation and to look into the issues that were all of the issues that are being raised tonight by members of the commission.
All right, I'm sure we'll be talking about this, and we absolutely want to continue to learn from this and definitely keep close tabs on it as well. I think we need to also talk about, I'm sorry, Mr. Richardson.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask a question. At the start, you had mentioned identifying maybe someone, I believe, to work with you. I know we're waiting for staff to get on board around making sure that we had all those questions and inquiries centralized, prepared for the DC auditor. Is that something that you were soliciting and requesting tonight from amongst the commissioners for some support with that, or if that might be later in the agenda?
No, that would be great. It was in one of the earlier emails that I sent, but yeah, absolutely. Would love for one of the commissioners. You don't need to do it tonight, but absolutely to help coordinate, make sure we don't let any of those questions slip through the cracks. So any of you are welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. I know we still need to talk about the commission procedures, and we did not yet finish going through the legislation. So I want to make sure that we get to that. I don't know if either we should start with, Blaine, if there's any difference between starting with the procedures or the legislation.
I want to recognize, I think Tina has her hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes, I think it's great that we came up with all these committees, and when the commission was put in place, what didn't fall, of course, right, is policy. Because what's going to actually stand in our way is what's standing in our way right now. The policy is going to stand in our way, right? We're not allowed to look at, if we're trying to see if we're allowed to look at the police records, like that's a policy change. So I'm not sure if we can have a committee based on policy yet, but can we get a running list of what changes we do need to make on policy? And, those of us that can focus on that, start to focus on that as well. We're not going to get much done if we don't change the policy to follow.
I think it's a really, really key point, and I just want to make very, very clear that every committee should be looking at policy. Every committee should be looking at what policies, what training, what practices, what laws need to change for the transformation we need to happen. That is absolutely that is one of the reasons we broke it up into policies, because if you look at all the things that need to change, it can become overwhelming. But if we focus on particular areas and what needs to change to make this work, the hope is that we'll be able to do that. And as we mentioned earlier, there will definitely be some overlap, and there'll be some things that different policies. One policy will impact many committees' topics, and we'll need to work together on that. But absolutely, policy is key, and every committee should be assessing. And also, the legislation that we're about to go through, that we're about to discuss, that is emergency legislation that is soon going to be up for discussion and will be modified, right? So if it's good, we should be making recommendations for it to stay that way or be made better. If it's bad, we should be making recommendations for that to change. That's why this commission exists, is to figure out what the laws and policies should be to help transform policing and community services in DC to better protect public safety. So it's a really important point. Thank you, Tina.
And for folks doing the committee work too, please feel free to reach out to me to help with any logistics and stuff like that. That's what I'm here for. And until we get other staff on board, I'll be helping you all sort of navigate all of that. And if there's anything, like any resources you need or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me as well. I want to be as open as possible for y'all. So I figured we could talk about the procedures first, if that's okay, Christine, Robert, and then finish off with the legislation, unless you have a
no, that sounds great.
Okay. Let me share my screen really quick. All right, can y'all see the PDF? Okay, great, good. So we talked about these a little bit on the first meeting, not during the emergency meeting, but the first meeting on the 26th. And I got some feedback from folks that I wanted to try to incorporate into the procedures. Not a ton has changed though, so I'll just briefly go over some of the changes. Under the members, officers, and duties section, we added something for the co-chairs, which is to say that co-chairs should ensure that subcommittees sort of understand their mandate and also help facilitate subcommittee access to resources necessary to complete work. Under meetings, since we have the new website, I struck the DC Council website since we're going to be posting everything on the Police Reform Commission website. So instead of posting it on the council website, we'll be posting all the agenda items and everything to the Police Reform website. So that's a minor change, as is this as well, which is any notices of cancellation if those need to be sent out. Conduct of meeting, I just struck that because we moved it to a different place here. So I'm going to take you there in a second. And that's this new section on public engagement. So we wanted to add something that spoke to how the commission engages with the public and encouraging people to obviously participate in the commission process, provide testimony, and know that they can address anything within the commission's jurisdiction when they come before the commission or any committee that is a part of the commission. So point A is really about that. Point B here is that the commission really wants to hear from everybody, but also wants to make sure that there's a particular emphasis on folks who disproportionately experience violence and policing. So that way we're hearing from the most impacted individuals in the community. And so we wanted to make that very clear in here as well. And then point C is just that the co-chairs can determine the method and time permitted for any public comment. And that would go for any committees as well. So depending on how committees sort of want to do their work and how they want to engage with the public, that'll be left up to you all to decide. And then the final small change here is just that the commission may determine the process through which final recommendations will be considered and presented. So considered is sort of the process, like do you want to do something like consensus, majority vote, et cetera. And how you present it would be, do you have a report with majority recommendations, minority recommendations? It's just, I think it's too early to say how that's going to fall. So we wanted to put something in there just to give the commission discretion on what that would look like. So that way, when you're starting to have these discussions, you can decide as a commission where you want to go. So those are the changes that we've made since the last meeting. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, questions, ideas. Samantha?
So I apologize because I did not hit send on this email that I'm looking at, but I had a couple of things I wanted to lift up. And some of them you kind of hit on, but I do feel like we can have a discussion now around the final recommendations being determined by a majority vote. And wanting to make sure that we agree early on how we're going to capture the recommendations of dissenting voices, and also ensuring that we have a record of those votes, a public record of those votes.
Okay, yeah, do you want to start off, or I don't know if you have anything specific?
With language?
No, well, it doesn't
I'm
even
like,
have
I
to be
don't want to
language at this
wordsmith it
point.
right now.
No, just kind of like what you would like to see. I can help sort of generate some language, but.
Yeah, that I think that we include that any recommendations without majority vote be included in the public record, with a note on the voting record, as well as specific indication of any opposing recommendations that were made.
Does anybody else have thoughts?
Yeah, if I can jump in. So I think it's really the clarity around it. I do recall kind of having part of this conversation with Christy during, I guess, my initial interview to be participating on the committee, that dissenting votes or dissenting positions really are important, and it should be captured. And in as much as there may be a majority of vote around some of these issues, we should also, if there's a strong opinion about something, we should make sure that that's part of the record. Some of us do represent organizations, and in as much as we're participating on the commission, and I do think it's important that we certainly carry the line, so to speak, with the direction of the commission. But for me, for my organization, we may feel much stronger about a particular issue, and certainly would not want it to be, squash is probably too strong a word, but certainly we want to make sure that we're on the record in terms of pushing that particular position or comment as well. So I'm in agreement. Yeah, we do need to ensure that there's a process for any dissenting opinions, that's part of the record as well. I just want to make sure that's underscored.
This is Bob Bennett. I think we should make an effort, and perhaps it's naive, but the less disagreement we have by individual commissioners is better overall for the credibility of our work. My sense is if there are too many disagreements on fundamental issues, it will be a lot easier to discredit the commission's work.
If I can, well, so
point out that it kind of depends on.
There are probably going to be more comments. Well, let me jump in again. So, for me, this is not about disagreement. It's really, but it's very important to view. I think the selection of this committee was very strategic in terms of selecting folks that bring varying points of view, and that is important to the work that we're doing. Now, to the extent that we can merge that as a commission, I think that's great. But we all come at this with very different perspectives and very important points of view. So, so I do think we need to keep that in mind. But I want to work, and I'm sure all of you do as well. I want to work in a way that at the end of the day, we are really trying to reach an agreement in terms of the work that we're doing. But that may not necessarily happen on all of these issues. I'm being very clear about that. I recognize that may not necessarily happen on all of these issues.
Yeah, let me say, I don't know. I, for one, don't know that there's a great deal of disagreement among the commissioners. I don't know how the commissioners feel on the fundamental issues. And I wonder whether it might not be a good idea to either today or at one of our meetings have people just sort of express their initial views, subject, of course, to those views being changed or what their fundamental concerns are. I just raised that as a possibility.
Yeah, Patrice, I want to make sure you got I think you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just, I can understand why consensus might seem like one way of going to the council and getting credibility from the council's perspective, but I think credibility with the community matters just as much, and we want to make sure that everyone on this commission has their voices represented and fully heard. And so I can't see a downside to including or erring on the side of inclusivity when it comes to everybody's viewpoints. I am always happy to have kind of like one-off conversations about my fundamental values and what brings me to this work, but I do not think that we have a lot of time for philosophical debates, and I'm eager to get to work. And I have a lot of specific policy recommendations, and I don't really care to have like separate, like full meetings of the commission just on some kind of like, where does everybody stand?
I think this is about, I think much of the discussion and the debate or research, et cetera, will take place in the committee process. And I think this is where the voices of not only members of the commission, but also members of the community, members of organizations that are represented by commission members on various topics. And if you're not on a particular commission or committee, but there are recommendations that you would like to advance into that commission, into that committee, then I think those would be, more than appropriate. And if at the end of the day we aren't at a consensus on the overall report, and there are dissenting opinions and reports, then those should all be considered and discussed and made part of the public record, and then we move forward. But our goal at the end of the day is the charge for which we were, the charter that we have, and the expertise that members of the commission brings to the work of the commission. But much of the heavy lift, at least from my experience, is going to be within the committees, and that's where, within the committee itself, maybe considerable debate, maybe agreement, dissension, etc. But the final report will be a compilation of what comes from the various the committees.
Yeah.
So yes, I would welcome, those who, if at the end of the day we have a dissenting report on an issue, on a policy, yes, those should be part of the public record, and we'll make it, it should be transparent and part of the public record as well.
Yeah, I think, so what I'm hearing is that we all agree that it would be nice, I'm reminded of the words of Rachel Herzing, that we come up with solutions so beautiful that no one can resist it, and we all want to sign on to it. But at the same time, this is difficult work, and we may not all end up agreeing on everything. And if that is the case, that we all want there to be full transparency on that. I think that's what I'm hearing from the people who have spoken so far. What I would suggest is that we all take this back and think about it. We don't have to decide this tonight, and I think there's some pros and cons to each side. And the way that the wording is right now, it allows us that flexibility. I hear Sam in wanting that sort of set out sooner rather than later. So I suggest we let people be thinking about how that will play out, or how, what they think about that, and then we come back when we've had time to consider it a bit and decide which way we want to go. Right now, I think what I was hearing so far is that we want try to agree, but if we don't, we want transparency.
I agree.
Go ahead. Kurt, were you gonna?
I think we're close to a consensus, unless I'm naively not picking up on subtlety. But I mean, I know I'm going to bend over backwards to try to be part of the majority viewpoint, even if it means making some compromises in my observations. But at the end of the day, I think it's good to have a minority report. If there is, different points of view. So I think, we'll strive to have consensus, and if we don't quite make it, we'll have the opportunity for a minority to issue their report. I think that's very fair.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I can send out some draft language to folks as well. just to get an idea of where people are at in terms of what they would be comfortable with.
I think that sounds good. Is everyone good with that?
Samantha?
Yes, I have one other thing. I have other things, but those things could wait. The one other thing I did want to bring up now is in the event, in addition to this, just the release of the report. I believe this commission was tasked to release a report in December. And I do believe that there are some things that we can move on and make formal recommendations on before December. Potentially, there's a potential for that. And so want to suggest that we put some language in there around the releasing of reports to the public before the deadline, whether that's every other month or if it's when we have specific recommendations, but to think about how we can be intentional about giving information to the public and offering suggestions or recommendations to council and the executive as soon as possible, versus us sitting on it till December, if that makes sense to folks.
Anyone have any thoughts on that? I wrote it down so I can definitely make sure we try to address it. I just didn't know if there were any other follow-up. I don't see any. All right, were there any other?
I think
oh,
we should put it, but I think we should put it as a suggestion, but we're either going to have one complete report or we're going to have a series of reports. And so I think it warrants further discussion. Once the committees begin its work, and we've also offered an opportunity, there may be public engagement by various committees. I just have some concern as to whether or not we're going to be issued a bifurcated report, or we're going to issue a consolidated report with agreements and with dissent. And so I'd like to think about that more, that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Christy? Oh, sorry. I looked at you.
No, my sound cut out for a little bit, so I'm definitely gonna have to think more about that question once I find out a little bit more about what it was. So,
okay.
Apologies for that.
Did anybody have any other comments or thoughts on the procedures before we jump to legislation?
I just wanted to briefly say, I mean, I see a lot of comments about the commission being performative and what are you going to do, and you guys aren't going to do anything. And I just want to say, like, sort of what brings me here is that as everybody can see from our procedures and the mandate, the point here is for us to make recommendations about changes in law, right? Everybody wants to see changes in law. Everybody wants to see us do a much better job and something transformative with policing in the district. And so for those who keep asking, what are you going to do, or you're not going to do anything, or saying that this is performative, trying to change the law is sort of my answer to that question. And I'd ask the co-chairs to correct me if I'm wrong. Is that not what we're setting out to do here? Can we be clear about that with the public, about what we're doing?
Yeah, I think we've been pretty clear with the public about what we're doing, and we'll continue to be clear. It's exactly as you just stated, Patrice. And there will be people who will understand that or not, or believe that or not, frankly. And it's only going to, it'll only become clear once our report comes out. I do want to note that there's a tension between getting things done quickly and taking a little bit longer. These are problems that have taken at least 400 years to create. And I think we should take the time to do as much as we can to work through some really tricky issues, to really get educated, to get the right people before us, to get the analysis, to do the analysis. And if that takes a few extra months after waiting hundreds of years, I think that it's a balance. You can't let it draw out interminably, but we really do want to make sure that we take the time to get this right. So I think that is something to be mindful of. I think that there are a lot of people who would love to see this commission shut down on December 31st, even if we are in the midst of our work, especially if we're in the midst of our work and we're getting it right. So I just want to say I'm committed to advocate for this commission to take the time that it needs to get it right, even as I'm committed to making doing my best to push every single one of you and myself and our staff when we get them to get things done as quickly and as thoroughly as we can.
I would just.
I'd just like to respond to the question of changing the law, please. Someone, I can't recall the commissioner who made the comment, but if there are policies, practices, and procedures and laws which has to be changed, clearly, I mean, we should move forward and make those recommendations with the rationale behind it. Absolutely.
I got you. Don't worry.
Has anybody or will staff pull together changes of law, procedures, etc., that other jurisdictions have made so that we can examine them and don't have to reinvent the wheel? I mean, there's other smart people who of similar kinds of commissions, and wouldn't it be helpful to see what all those others have said? And I mean, I think we should not accept them on its face, but it might cut down on the time we have to spend on some issues.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount. I think that's absolutely right. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, and there's a tremendous amount of expertise on the commission. I know, for example, Pastor Delante has done a lot of this work, exactly the kind of things we're going to want to be looking at here in other jurisdictions. A lot of this stuff has been done in DC, a lot of the police practices people know about. So absolutely part of the work of the committees should be figuring out what we already know. And that's definitely one of the things we're looking for in the people to staff the commission. We want people who are experts in what's already been done in these areas so that we can learn from them. But again, there's tremendous expertise on the commission. So that hopefully that will keep us from reinventing the wheel.
I think Naike was trying to chime in, sorry.
No problem, Benny. So I just wanted to make sure we also acknowledge the expertise of the lived experience that people have in the community as well, because it's obviously going to be very helpful to look at best practices in other communities, but we need to make sure that whatever recommendations we come up with are catering to our community and what our community is experiencing. And so I want to make sure that we don't limit the conversation about expertise to those with like academic expertise or expertise in other jurisdictions, because when it comes to expertise on experiencing MPD, that's the people here, that's our community. And so I just want to make sure we have every opportunity and we provide every opportunity, including significant advance notice for the organizers on the ground to tell us what they're seeing, for them to propose their suggestions, for us to have robust discussion about what that looks like, and to really be listening, because as much expertise as I may have in a certain area, it's not the same thing as experiencing it firsthand. So I just want to make sure that we uplift the experiences of our neighbors and the community when we're having these conversations.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think what works in Kalamazoo doesn't necessarily will not work in DC. And while we have the body of information and all of the research from other jurisdictions, we really need to focus on, that's nice reference, but I think we need to really have a biased focus on the expertise from every segment of our community and the input that our community members bring to the table as well. So I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with you with respect to those comments that you just made. While we have a consulting group that's coming on board and they'll bring a body of knowledge, but at the end of the day, the real expertise, we sometimes overlook those who are in our community that brings a more community-based level expertise that can help to reform how we move forward as a community. I'm in total agreement with that, with your statement, Nike.
Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add? I want to make sure we're not missing any commissioners before we move on to the last part of the overview of the law. All right, not hearing any. Before we jump into going back over the law, I do want to mention, just in the spirit of what Pastor Delonte had said at the last meeting, that we're going to be talking about some things that are potentially triggering for folks. And so just want to put that out there and make sure that people are aware that some of the concepts and language that we'll be discussing as part of this, including things like use of force, can be triggering to folks who have experienced violence, particularly those who have experienced violence at the hands of law enforcement. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, there should be a PDF up on the screen now of the law. And if I remember correctly, we had just finished with subtitle H about identification for police officers. So I was going to jump into subtitle I, but before I do that, I wanted to correct something because I made a misstatement at our August 26th meeting. When I had talked about the, let me scroll up to it really quick, consent searches piece here, limitations on consent searches. I had referenced an article by a George Washington law professor, and that's actually not related to this. And so I wanted to just correct that. It's related to the use of force that we'll be, use of force section we'll be talking about later. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. And my apologies for not getting that correct first time. So with that said, what we're gonna do here is sort of jump into the, let me get this right, jump into the law. And we'll start with subtitle I, which is preserving the right to jury trial. So this does a couple of things for folks who maybe aren't aware. It was quite a few years ago, the council amended the law with respect to when you can demand a jury trial and when you can't. And when they did that, they increased it to say that it has to be above 180 days. The penalty for the crime has to be over 180 days in order for somebody to be able to request a jury trial. And in doing that, that means that several offenses actually end up not being captured. So what we have here, so this, for instance, section 806, that actually references assault or threatened assault in a menacing manner and stalking. As you'll see, it is imprisoned not more than 180 days or both. So that's not currently covered. The other piece that is mentioned in here for right to a jury trial is resisting arrest, which is also 180 days. It says 6 months, but that's around 180 days and not more than. And then the last piece is threats to do bodily harm, which is again, imprisoned not more than 6 months and or being on bond and fines. Now, what this does though, is it preserves a right to a jury trial if the person who is alleged to be the victim of the offense is a law enforcement officer. So that's a very narrow circumstance, and the commission may want to look at recommendations on what other circumstances people should be able to request a jury trial. And I can't speak to the intent behind it. If folks are curious, I would definitely recommend talking to Councilmember Allen, since him and his team wrote a lot of this, and they could probably speak better to some of the reasoning behind why they did what they did. So I just want to make people aware of that though, so that way people understand that it's only for those circumstances where the victim is a member of law enforcement. The second piece here is the repeal to, it's a repeal of failure to arrest. So in our current code, which I can jump to, I believe here, if an officer does not arrest someone who is breaking the law, they're actually guilty of a misdemeanor and punishable by imprisonment in district jail or penitentiary, not exceeding 2 years, or by a fine of not exceeding $500. I tried to find sort of why this was in our laws, and it goes back to 1862, actually, with the law that created the Metropolitan Police Department. The congressional record doesn't really speak to why this particular language was inserted into the law, but it could have been a sort of reaction to the Supreme Court creating the public duty doctrine under South v. Maryland in 1885. It could have been any number of things that ended up making them put this in there, but I couldn't really find any particular reason. And I found that Nevada has a similar statute still in force, but this was repealed by the current emergency law and temporary law that was put into effect. So then we have amending subtitle K, which is amending minimum standards for police officers. This codifies 3 minimum standards for Metropolitan Police Department officers in order for them to become officers. That includes that they will be ineligible if the applicant was previously determined by a law enforcement agency to have committed serious misconduct, if they were terminated or forced to resign for disciplinary reasons, and if they were previously resigned from a law enforcement agency to avoid any potential or pending adverse disciplinary action. Because sometimes folks will try to jump ship before anything bad happens that gets on their record, and so we wanted to make sure that was included as well. I think some of this language was drawn from the general orders of MPD, which have a little bit more about the sort of minimum standards for police, because there actually isn't a ton in our law currently. So these additions were pulled slightly from there.
All right, Blaine, can I ask for clarification? So does that subsection apply only to new applicants to be police? Because we've even heard Chief Newsham complain that current officers, if they are let go or fired because of their arbitration contracts, they can actually be, are rehired or forced to be rehired.
Yeah, so this would apply to new officers, but the next section actually addresses some of the arbitration stuff that you're speaking to, because I know Chief Newsham and previously Chief Ramsey have talked a lot about that publicly, which is subtitle L. So what this does is it amends the Comprehensive Merit Personnel Act of 1978 to state that any matter pertaining to discipline of sworn law enforcement personnel is retained by management. Right now, the way that the law is worded, it gives management the right to do disciplinary actions, but the process through which you get to that point is subject to collective bargaining. And so in future collective bargaining agreements, this would be removed from that. So that way the police union, FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, could no longer negotiate disciplinary procedures. We had to do it obviously to future collective bargaining agreements, otherwise there would have been a potential contracts clause violation. But speaking to your point, Naike, this would basically take all of the current things that they have with arbitration and all of that out of the hands of the union and out of the collective bargaining agreement.
Right, and just for transparency, the union is currently suing because of this.
Correct, yeah. They are suing. I uploaded the complaint to the Dropbox for commissioners to take a look at. And I just uploaded the other day, the city responded and requested a motion to dismiss or for summary judgment. So I put that into the Dropbox as well. Move on to section M. This amends some of the disciplinary process that's in our laws. As it stands right now, if a police officer is found to have engaged in serious misconduct, this is both in the law and in the collective bargaining agreement, the department essentially has 90 days to do an adverse action, which means that they cannot, if the 90 days is gone and they're like, let's say 180 days out, they wouldn't have been able to do any sort of disciplinary action to officers who engaged in misconduct. So this lengthens that for serious use of force or criminal conduct by police officers. We found in cases, especially in arbitration cases, a lot of times, if MPD is not like really tight on those timelines and doesn't hit the 90-day mark, the arbitrator might either reduce the punishment or basically tell them that they have to be reinstated. So this, for a subset of misconduct, extends that timeline a little bit from 90 days to 180. But it keeps in place the 90-day time limit for other things, of course, subject to the fact that a lot of this will no longer be in collective bargaining agreements. All right, and then, so this, we'll move on to the use of force reform section. So this does a couple of things, and I'll go through them, but I also want to note when we're talking about this too, that there was some language in the first bill that I did upload to, or at least I should have, I think, to Dropbox that was taken out of the first emergency and then not included in this. But what this does is we don't have any use of force standards codified in law currently, and so this codifies definitions of deadly force, deadly weapon, and serious bodily injury, as you can see via the PDF that's on the screen. And it basically says that officers cannot use force unless the officer reasonably believes that deadly force is immediately necessary to protect a law enforcement officer or another person from serious bodily injury or death. The officer's actions are considered reasonable given the totality of circumstances. And then finally, that they have exhausted all other options or those options did not lend themselves to the circumstances. So that means that they've exhausted any sort of de-escalation protocols or anything like that. And that's, once they actually fulfill all those three prongs, that's when they would be able to use force according to the law. What was in the first version of the bill was that there was a definition for non-deadly force, which meant that any use of force that, they defined it as any use of force that is not likely or intended to create a substantial risk of serious bodily injury or death. And what the first bill did is it restricted the use of non-deadly force to circumstances where there was probable cause to believe the person had committed a crime. The force is being used to prevent a person's escape from lawful custody, or the officer uses no more force than what was reasonably necessary to do an arrest or obtain a person's compliance to lawful orders. I can't speak to why that language was removed from the first bill. So I do encourage folks to reach out to Councilmember Allen's office if they would like. I can definitely facilitate that as well if they would like to know more about that. This also makes it so triers of fact, so people considering what officers did, whether or not use of force was reasonable, they have to look at those three prongs that I mentioned earlier that are right up here in order to determine whether or not the use of force was reasonable. And this is based off of George Washington law professor Cynthia Lee's article. Do folks have any questions about this section before I keep jumping on? I don't see any. I want to make sure we're giving time for each, even though I know it's a lot of information. So subtitle O, this prohibits district law enforcement from acquiring certain property through a program operated by the federal government. Folks may be familiar with the 1033 program, which is run by the Defense Logistics Agency out of Department of Defense. That program gives, basically gives excess Department of Defense property to local jurisdictions, enabling them to get things like Bearcats, MRAPs, and all sorts of military gear for police. And that was created in 1997, I believe. So what this does is if a district law enforcement agency requests or acquires any sort of property like this, it would basically, they would have to publish a notice on the request within 14 days after the date of the request. And any of the property that they currently have that falls under these prohibited categories, so ammunition, 50 caliber or higher, armed or armored aircrafts or vehicles, bayonets, explosives, pyrotechnics, any of this would need to be, the agencies would need to get rid of it if they currently have it. And my understanding from looking at the 1033 program data is that I did not see anything from DC on there, but there may be other avenues for acquiring that sort of property that I'm not familiar with. And they would have to disgorge of that property described in subsection A within 180 days of the effective date of this act. So if they haven't done that already, they only have a little bit more time to do so.
Blaine, there's so many law enforcement agencies that operate in the district, and some are federal and some are not. This doesn't say any, does this, and is there any way to influence what equipment and weapons law enforcement officials who are not DC law enforcement officials use when they're in the district?
Unfortunately, no, just because we don't have jurisdiction over federal agents, and it kind of becomes touchy. You'll see that in a section here in a minute on use of chemical irritants. We can certainly, request that they not use that kind of equipment, but they don't have to honor that if they don't want to. So for subtitle P, this is amending the First Amendment Assemblies Act of 2004. Folks probably already aware, but the act that was passed in 2004 arose out of mass arrests and unconstitutional actions that were taken by MPD against protesters in April of 2000 and 2002 at Pershing Park, when they did mass arrests of anti-globalization protesters. So this defines what a chemical irritant is, and also defines what a less lethal projectile is, and then says that during First Amendment assemblies, officers shall not be basically deployed in riot gear unless there is immediate risk to officers of significant bodily injury, and that any deployment needs to be consistent with the district's policy on First Amendment assemblies and can't be used as a tactic to disperse an assembly. And then following any deployment of officers in riot gear in response to a First Amendment assembly, the police department is supposed to post a written report within 48 hours and make that available to the public. It also prohibits the use of chemical irritants to disperse First Amendment assemblies and lethal projectiles. And as you'll see here, it asks the mayor to request that any federal law enforcement agencies operating in the district to refrain from using those as well. But again, they don't have to honor that if they don't want to, sort of up to them. I won't spend too much time on subtitle Q since that's what you're all here for.
I have a question, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm sure many of you do. If under this statute, a police officer is justified in using deadly force, i.e. he pulls his gun, does he have to shoot to kill, or can he just wound somebody in the leg? Or is that just left up to him or her?
So I would just say, and there are probably people here with more experience than me, but I've done a lot of work around force science. And what we've found is that you can't really shoot to wound, because even if you wound somebody in the leg or the arm, they could bleed out very quickly, especially if they hit like a major artery. So I don't know how realistic that is, especially in situations where there's a lot of movement going on and somebody, you know, hitting like a limb or something like that would be very difficult.
Well, that person could live. The other way, he's certain to die. Anyway. Okay, thank you.
I can just raise one. It's a very minor thing. I mentioned to Christy in passing once. As Blaine pointed out, I mean, it is a great dilemma that we have so many federal police here in the District of Columbia who are outside our jurisdiction. And I mean, I don't have a solution as to what we do with this, but I think it's a terrible, terrible problem. A citizen who's being mistreated, be it for trifling or for the worst matter, is not paying attention to what jurisdiction the police officer is from. But the one exception is, which was not put in our jurisdiction, but I think should be, is the DC Housing Police, which is a police force under the jurisdiction of the District of Columbia government. I do think that in addition to the MPD, that should be under our jurisdiction.
All right. I'm going to go, unless there's any other comments, I'm going to go quickly over subtitle R. So this creates, oh, Pastor, did you have something?
I would just echo what Kurt said, what Commissioner Vorndran said. I don't know you well enough to call you Kurt yet, all the Zoom stuff. So I won't take liberties. But I would definitely echo that there is a need for us to be clear about the fact that Housing Authority is, I mean, just yesterday, Housing Authority was down the street from my house on the scene at a situation that went down off East Capitol Street. So it's definitely something that we should consider. I do think that just based upon this whole meeting thus far tonight, we need to have some back channel conversations, some offline conversations about what our mandate is. We need to be very clear when we come on these Zooms and have these public forums. We need to start these forums by being explicitly clear from the onset, each meeting, at what our mandate is, when it begins, when it ends. I think it's worth it to start every meeting with just a short synopsis for the benefit of the community. I always share these meetings on my own Facebook page because we need to be very clear about what's our mandate, what's the reach of the mandate, when does it begin, when does it end. We need to do that every time we meet, because we're not going to be able to develop and maintain a sense of public trust unless our messaging is very tight. And so, you know, just me, I'm sitting here struggling with this whole meeting. I mean, obviously I got a lot of personal things going on. I got, family, but this is what everybody has going on. So, if we're going to be effective, we need to be very clear at the onset of every meeting what our agenda is, what our mandate is, make it very clear to the public. And I think we need to have some more side conversations as a commission around how much power this commission has, because the worst thing that can happen would be for the public to have a sense that this commission has more power than it actually has. And I just think we need to be very clear about the limitations of the power of this commission, so that we manage and meet the actual mandate and expectations of this commission. Otherwise, we're gonna really struggle with credibility. This is only, I want to just say this, Grace, this is only our third time meeting. You know what I'm saying? We just got sworn in tonight. Okay, so I get it, but this is urgent. Okay, we're dealing with life and death situations that we are all constantly traumatized by, and trying to get with it, trying to get healed, and trying to do this work, push this work forward. But we just got to be clear. And I do appreciate, Blaine, you starting us off with talking about how traumatizing and triggering this language is. I appreciate that. It's very difficult for me to hear you as a white man, though, talking about a police officer, shooting somebody to wound them, that it's very difficult for me to hear that. I understand you've done research on science and all that type of stuff, but it's difficult for me to hear. I know it's difficult for the viewing public to hear. Anyway, let's just make sure that we're very clear and consistent on messaging. Let's have I would recommend that we have some side conversations to make it even more crystal clear about the stretch and reach of our mandate, because there's some politics I see that's happening here, not only with respect to this commission, but also the reach of this commission. If we're going to be interacting with the deputy mayor's office, we don't even have mandate. So everything we're asking for, it's like we're asking for stuff that we don't even have the authority to make sure we get. And I don't want the public, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is a dance that we're doing. I don't want the public to think just because this commission asked Chief Nusha for something, or just because the commission asked Dr. Mitchell for something, that like they, are obligated by law to do what we asked them to do. We need to be clear. This commission's goal is to make recommendations to the council, and the council was going to have the work to do to get stuff actually done by the mayor and by the chief. And that's going to be up to the council. That's going to be up to the people to really push the mayor to get this stuff done. So I just want to just be crystal clear on our mandate, and just say I thank you also for just trying to be careful about the language that we use when we talk about violence against our communities, because it's really hard to hear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will definitely do my best to make sure that we're doing that every meeting. As you said, we're kind of getting our bearings, but and I'm seeing some things in the chat. I was answering a question from a commissioner, so I just want to make that clear. I was not actually saying that police should shoot to wound anybody.
Well, look, I asked the question. I wasn't suggesting that the police shoot to wound. I just wanted to know an answer to a question. See, I think very often I found when I was a federal prosecutor, and I dealt with, because of the unique jurisdiction of Washington, D.C., I was principally prosecuting murder cases. And there were cases that came before us where I thought the policeman did not have to shoot the person in the head or the chest, but he could have not a great solution, but probably he could have hurt the person or stopped the person from aggressively charging him by shooting in the leg. So I don't think it's fair to be criticized for that. And I don't know why we have to always assume it's shoot to kill. I just raised that as a question. I meant nothing to offend anyone.
Thank you, Robert. With that, I'll move on quickly since we want to wrap this up. I know folks got a lot on their plate. So subtitle R, I won't spend a ton of time on. This creates a police complaints board within WMATA. And the reason I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it is because there's a permanent piece of legislation that's a standalone bill that was moved as a part of that, that basically takes this out of the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act. And the reason why that's being done is because this amends a multi-jurisdictional compact that enables the district to think about this a little bit more, because we have to get not only language like this passed into a permanent law, we have to get Maryland on board, and we have to get Virginia on board, and then we have to get Congress on board. So there's a reason why we're sort of doing this in a different way than keeping it in the emergency legislation or permanent legislation that's based on this. And then subtitle B or Title 2, Subtitle A is Restore the Vote. This enfranchises incarcerated people. As folks are probably aware, before this was passed, I think only Maine and Vermont allowed incarcerated people to vote. And this amends the law to allow them to vote, even if they're in Bureau of Prisons custody, and it would require the Board of Elections to provide people that are incarcerated with a voter registration form, a voter guide, and educational materials about the importance of voting. It would also enable the board to get information on who's incarcerated, so that way they know exactly who is eligible that's currently in prison. And then, yeah, the last part is that individuals in DC Department of Corrections care would have to be notified of voting rights within 10 days of the effective date of the Emergency Act. Some of the provisions, particularly the ones about providing voter registration forms and voter guide, wouldn't take effect until January 1st, 2021. And this is a very historic thing, obviously, because as I said, Maine and Vermont were the only two jurisdictions that had this prior to us putting into law. And that pretty much wraps it up. I'll just go over this really quick. This repeals a couple of things. It repeals the first emergency that was passed. It also makes the section on limitations on consent searches applicable beginning August 15th. And then it states that Section 123 would only apply after Maryland, Virginia, and Congress approve. And that's it. And I think I provided a summary of the law in Dropbox as well. So if folks have any questions, I can definitely try to answer those as best as I can. But unless there's anything else, I can turn it over to Christy or Robert to go over next steps.
Well, I think one of the next steps for our next meeting is the way we started our initial meeting, and that is to go over our mandate. So I think just to make sure that, we're all on the, that we know what our charge is. If, as was suggested, we should do that at the beginning of our next meeting. We did that. We went over that at the beginning at our first meeting, but as an important reminder of what we are, who we are, what our responsibilities are. I mean, it's not, it's good to have that constant reminder at each of our meetings so that we are clear as to our mandate. I view this commission as being an independent body and making independent recommendations pursuant to its work. And I think the chairman of the city, Chairman Mendelson, made that clear to us at our first meeting in terms of our mandate, in terms of things that we can look forward to in the legislation as our important mandate. But if there are areas that we wanted to explore outside of those mandates, that we're, clear to, to do those things as well. I referenced the fact earlier that as we worked with through the committee process, we are going to have to have some touch points, as it were, with agencies of the district government that can provide us with information to help us formulate whatever our final recommendations are. It doesn't mean that we have to agree, but it does mean that we need to, as we work through our committee process, we should be willing to, we must reach out to anyone that can provide us with information to be successful. I would also like for us to set a date for when our committees actually, we've identified, we've set up the committees, we've identified the committees, and I think it's important for committees to begin to meet as soon as possible to determine what resources it needs to conduct its work, to organize itself so that we can move forward as quickly as possible to meet our overall mandates. Any questions? Concerns?
I have a quick question. I know the hearing, and it was mentioned earlier, the hearing on October 15th that's reviewing this legislation and others. Is there any type of like protocol or decorum that we as commissioners should take for those of us who are testifying at that hearing? Or any other hearing that might relate to the work of this commission?
I'll answer in two ways. Because I did the committee meeting that's meeting, I think it's April 13th or April 15th. I mean October 15th. I believe that the meeting of the Judiciary Committee is what you're referring to, Ms. Davis.
Yes.
Yes, I think if you're going to give testimony, you know, I think any commission member, at least from my viewpoint, are welcome to provide its opinion, its comments at that meeting, or that of its agency. But it doesn't necessarily have to represent, you know, it doesn't represent the work of the commission. It could very well, as we go through the committee process, but clearly, you know, if you have testimony that you want to provide as a representative of the community on any of those issues, or as a representative of your organization, please feel free to do so and share your testimony with us as a commission, because, you know, there are always pearls of wisdom that we may not be considering, or that we may consider, and we want to help to refine. And I might add that if in the course of anyone who's going to testify, if there is any assistant at Blaine's office, or if we are able to bring on a team that could help, you know, with some of the research or some of the refinement of your testimony before the commission as an individual or as a member of an organization, please, you know, reach out. Absolutely.
I just want to say thank you to Pastor Delonte for that recommendation to sort of start the meetings with our mandate. It is, I think it will be helpful to keep us all, and there might be new people observing in every meeting, to just help make it clear what we can and what we are and what we aren't charged with doing. I think it's a really good idea. And I also want to thank Blaine for his help during this meeting, and as always, it's been tremendously useful. And it's, you know, there's some tremendously sensitive issues, and we're just starting to get to work through them. I appreciate that. And I want to thank all of the commissioners for all of their questions. I think it's really important that we be asking these very difficult questions. And again, back to Pastor Delonte for the reminder that we all do so in matters as sensitive as possible, but that, you know, we learn from that, and we try to make sure that we continue to address these really difficult issues so that we can move forward. I appreciate everyone's dedication to this.
Any final comments from any other members of the commission? Anything that we missed? Anything that we should, you know, any hot button items or thoughts that you all have? If you don't want to, you know, if not tonight, then send something forward. Whatever we, you know, there's a question or concern, an issue, we'll respond to it, and we'll make sure that every member of the commission receives a copy of whatever correspondence that we receive from any one of the members. And we do, I don't want to leave without, we need a member of the commission.
Robert, just one question before you go. Samantha had put a question in the chat that I thought was important, requesting an update on our anti-racism training. So if we have any updates for that, I think that would be helpful before we close today.
I'm sorry.
The anti-racism training, I think we talked about it at our first meeting, and it was going to be scheduled, and I think the commission chairs had asked about recommendations for people to perform the training. So I just wanted to highlight that request.
Oh yes, definitely. I think we had a couple of recommendations for the training, and I think that's something that we, you know, if there are others that could submit, individuals who can conduct this training, or organizations. I think I've seen only one, maybe. A couple, Christy?
I think we have 2 recommendations.
Okay, I think if there are others, I think that's important that we have I think it's anti-bias training, racial bias training. Yeah, those were good recommendations, and I think we need to move quickly to decide who's going to, what firm we're going to, individual that we're going to, contract with, and have that training done. Or if they're members of the commission themselves who, we have a lot of expertise on the commission who have done this type of training before and would like to provide the training or assist with the training. We're clearly open to all of those ideas, all of those concepts as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say, if anybody in the community who's watching, or any of the organizers have good recommendations as far as people who could help train us, maybe they can email the commission's email address.
Yes, please.
So I think I mentioned when we addressed this a couple of weeks or so ago, I am happy to participate in the training, but I was raising a question with regard to whether this is a practice that police officers go through as well. And one of the reasons I decided to serve on one of the 2 committees is because this is probably one of the recommendations I'm going to make. I think it's so important if we're going to go through it, since this is such a sensitive issue, that sensitivity need to be shared with the police, the folks who are guarding us, and our police force as well. So I know this will be one of the recommendations that I'll be making.
Thank you.
I just wanted to lift up, and it looks like Pastor Delonte are able to coordinate so that we can move this forward as quickly as possible in narrowing down who delivers the training and setting a schedule for us to receive that as a commission.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. It honestly has just been a, it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll touch base with you all offline.
Great. And then, yeah, I did want to also note, we had somebody ask about ASL interpretation and closed captioning. So I'll remember the closed captioning next time for sure. And then we can look into getting an ASL interpreter as well.
And I have a question. How do we determine when we will meet publicly versus privately? I know that there are opportunities for us as a commission to, be able to meet before we are in front of folks publicly. So, what's the criteria for that?
Yeah, so, go. Sorry, Christy, were you gonna?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so you can meet privately as a commission if there's not a quorum of commissioners present. So if there's 10 or less commissioners, you can meet privately. And then within the Open Meetings Act law, there are certain circumstances under which you can do a closed meeting, which would include things like trainings for the commission. So your anti-racism training, if you want to, you could do it closed or you could keep it open. It just depends on sort of what kind of atmosphere you want. But those are within the law. So I'm definitely happy to go through those again if you have any questions.
And that's one of the reasons, yeah, so it's going to be important, I think, that the committees meet not in public, if only because everyone's on 2 committees and there's, 18 commissioners on committees, and just scheduling that would be difficult if everything had to be public, right? So there will be definitely times, a lot of the committee work, most of the committee work will not be in public. And then you'll just be like learning stuff and figuring stuff out. And then part of the committee charge is to figure out which topics you really want to bring to have a public hearing on and what the content of that will be, who will speak at those. But that doesn't mean you can't and shouldn't be speaking with people in the community and others throughout the course of the committee work, even if you don't have 2 days to notice that to the public.
Are we going to be, I understand what you're saying is that the committee meetings are not going to be public, but are we going to be publishing any sort of minutes or anything like that for the public to review?
I don't know. That makes sense to me, but I don't know what the parameters are on that.
Yeah, so committees would definitely want to take minutes of the meetings, and I would say it's up to the committees on how much they want to engage publicly. So if a committee really wants to do a lot of public engagement, I'm certainly happy to help with that and try to facilitate that to the extent that we can, and to the extent that you're comfortable with. But yeah, that's kind of up to the folks on the committee how they want to proceed there, and I will help you do that.
I certainly would encourage that the committees are organized as much public input that the committees can bring into the body of its work. I think would be a pretty valuable process for the committee as it organizes and determine how it's going to approach its work, but the extent to which there is the committees can gather and gain as much input from various segments of the community or from the community overall. I just think it makes for a more robust process going forward.
And just so I understand as well as, or as clearly as possible, if we want to get input from the public for committee meetings, do they then become public meetings, or do we just invite members of the public into our closed committee meetings?
You can do either or. If there's not a quorum present, it doesn't have to be a public meeting in the same sense that this meeting is. But if you want to post things publicly, post notice in advance, those are definitely things that we can do.
Or if, like, Blaine, if some members of a committee wanted to go to a particular community meeting to hear from people that was already, community group that was already meeting, like, you could go and do that, right? Like, even if you found out the meeting was tomorrow, you could go and you wouldn't, okay.
If there's no other business to come before the commission, there a motion to adjourn?
Sounds good. Does anybody have any last final thoughts, words?
Please feel free to reach out to me or Christy if you have any issues or concerns, if we're not moving the process in a manner in which you're comfortable or uncomfortable, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and or Christy.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bob.
Night.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Night.
Thanks, everybody. Peace.